Welcome to the Seven Muscles podcast. This is a series of conversations in which we explore the skills we need to self-organize. I'm Andy Knut, and the muscle we're exploring today is moving gracefully in rough waters. So it's about conflict and tensions, and how to transform anger to fierceness, and also about which role the body can play in that process. And for this, I'm joined by Adam Barley, who's standing across from me. Welcome, Adam. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Andy. Nice to be here.
Adam, you're a mover, you're a teacher, you're an author of a great book, and also a founder of 01, which is your movement platform. And from your self-description, there is a part that said you understand yourself as a movement catalyst. So maybe we could start from there a little bit. Like, what does that mean for you? What do you catalyze? What is your practice? If you can just start with that.
The reason I call myself a movement catalyst is because that's deep in my sort of DNA as a human being. I'm using the term DNA rather loosely, of course, but as a sort of human being here on earth, my longing is my urgency, and in a way my gift to the world is to get things moving. And the reason for that is because I grew up incredibly stuck. Okay. I grew up in a very nice, apparently nice, middle-class English family where deep down we were all having a really tough time, had no ability to connect with each other, the five of us, my two parents and my two siblings and I. And it was an experience of being trapped and stuck. No communication, no change, no movement, no real relating. And it was a nightmare. And so, of course, I grew up with a huge longing for freedom and movement and change. And that's become my work. Okay. And the way I do it is by getting people moving physically, because I learnt fairly early on in my attempt to find freedom that moving my body was the fastest, most efficient and effective way to changing everything.
Wow. Okay. That's nice. I'm curious. And I know a little bit about it because I've just visited one of your workshops this weekend, Fierce Loving. And just also still on the outer limits sort of our topic. Obviously, we are talking here about personal development, and what you're talking about is requires something about, or it deals with personal development. And I know you're also very, very concerned with and hot about social development and transformation. And so are we at Sozius, and so is the idea of self-organization. And I know that sometimes the notion of self-development has this bit of an escapist touch to it. The retreat, you go back, you go into it. But obviously these two are somehow linked. And how are they linked for you? What's the link?
I think they are linked inextricably, I would say. I mean, I went to university to study environmental sciences in the mid-'80s because I was concerned about what I could see unfolding in the world, and I wanted to save the planet. You know, right. What I learned at university was that the planet will save itself. It doesn't really need a lot of saving. It's pretty well used to going through massive crises every few million years, and it's us that's in trouble. And our relationship with the earth and each other and our dependency upon the ecosystems in which we live. And I realized by the end of that 3 years at university, I realized that we were so deep in trouble that I couldn't see environmental science really being the miracle cure that would save us and our way of life. And it became clear to me that it's people that are the problem. Like, we know what the solutions are to do well on Earth, both ecologically and politically and socially, and in terms of poverty and injustice. We have all the solutions. That's not the mystery. The mystery is how we might, as a collective, actually make the decisions that need making. Right. And it seems to me that the reason we don't do that is because sufficient numbers of us are wounded, basically traumatized, really. I'm to use the latest buzzword. We're traumatized, and the level of collective inherited intergenerational trauma that we're suffering from as human beings is just off the charts. And it's my personal belief that we're not really going to change very much in terms of our relationships to each other, as how we function as societies, or our relationship to the planet, unless we deal with that level of underlying intergenerational trauma.
Okay.
And not that that's the only thing that we need to do, but I think it's pivotal, and it's where my fascination is. And so I've devoted my life to helping people to really wake up from the kind of trance that trauma induces in us, where we walk around half asleep and not really understanding and seeing what our patterns are, and not really therefore being able to get to grips with them and do something differently. And I think that we function as a collective, as a sort of synthesis or a blend of what we all are individually. So my particular drop in the ocean of change is to work with individuals. But I think that the kind of work that you're doing absolutely needs to happen as well, so that we do evolve ways of functioning collectively that are based on healthy intrapersonal dynamics. I think the two have to go together.
Yeah, I like that. I do believe that strongly, and I do believe that this overcoming something that's sitting deeply needs to happen, and which is why also when we self-organization, obviously we look at it from an organizational perspective, but the idea of these 7 muscles is about that. Like, you cannot just take a practice from the shelf and think it's going to work, because you need to somehow transform yourself. And now, moving a little bit closer to our sort of specific muscle here with the rough waters. I have to admit, it's not my favorite, or it's not the one that I'm most fluent in, which is why I need to practice it. And I've asked a friend the other day, like, what would you recommend for me as a training or workshop that I can do to deepen it? And his answer was, do something that lets you forget your fear of conflict and tension. And obviously tension is something very, very, very important in this whole world of self-organizing. And my question would be, like, what is it that makes us, or many of us, I think it's not just me, but many of us, so afraid of these tensions, and so careful not to move too close to it? Do you have a take on that?
I have a lot I could say on this, so feel free to interrupt me if I go on too long or wander off track a bit. There's a number of angles I could go in at that question with. I think it's a very deep question. And the first thing I would say is, I think that inherent in the experience of conflict or troubled waters is anger and frustration and even potentially violence, of course. Not that it has to be that way, but it often is. And of course we're scared of all that. We're meant to be. We're designed to be afraid of things that threaten our well-being. Right. That's what fear is for. And anger and violence threaten our well-being. So it's a healthy response, in a sense, is to be afraid. Right. I would say the kind of the step that's needed is not to not be afraid, but to find our courage. And when we can approach conflict situations courageously, and actually it's really important to be in touch with our fear, not to get over it or toughen up around it, and so we like bravely grit our teeth and clench our fists and storm through the scary troubled waters, kind of a little tense. The trouble with that is that then we're a little out of touch with our own vulnerability. Right. And that's really when trouble starts, is when we enter into conflict situations out of touch with our own vulnerability. And I think our vulnerability is key, because if we're in touch with our own, then we're more likely to be sensitive to and attentive to the vulnerability of the other people in the situation. It's like the beginning of the capacity to have empathy for the people that we're in conflict with. Right. And if you don't have that, then you're sunk before you even start, I would say. So that's one answer. But I would say almost all of us also experienced being in conflict situations when we were very young, If we're lucky, like me, the sheer extent of that was a kind of brittle, underground, unspoken kind of emotional rigidity with a whole lot of anger happening under the surface and nothing being expressed. I consider myself kind of lucky that it was like that, although it took a fair amount of digging to find out what on earth the problem was and why I was so troubled.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get hit as a child. I was not growing up in a war zone. But nevertheless, my nervous system was on high alert all the way through my childhood because I was a sensitive kid. And I could tell that all was not well. I could tell there was not peace and love in the land. That deep down there was a kind of war going on, even though it was totally unspoken between my parents and between us kids. If you're then growing up in a war zone, I mean, I can't even imagine what the nervous system of children growing up in very explicitly violent environments is. But I think no matter what environment you grow up in, most of us had experiences as children around conflict where we were not seen. Like our difficulty with that and fear of that and distress around that was not seen. Nobody saw our difficulty and said, and empathized with us, attuned with us, and said, it's okay, I'm with you. You're not in this on your own. So most of us felt that we were on our own in this dangerous conflict situation. And I'm talking really young, like 3, 2, 1 babies. And at that age, we don't have the capacity to handle being on our own in a scary situation. So what we do is we dissociate, we split from ourselves, we create a separate self that can kind of manage the situation, and those traumatic feelings go underground until such time as we have the resources as adults to revisit it and unearth the troubled waters inside us, and then kind of find the capacity to deal with those things more in a more appropriate context-specific way. But a lot of the times people basically have their childhood stuff triggered when they get into a conflict situation. Those unexamined feelings from early childhood surface, and then all kinds of stuff ends up coming out of us that is not really appropriate to the situation. And we feel a level of fear that is more about the little child in us than the adult. Oh yeah, it's appropriate to be a bit scared if we're in a high voltage conflict situation at work, say. Mm-hmm. But often the deep down feelings that people are experiencing are not related to the context. There's all this background stuff that hasn't been dealt with.
Right.
So I would say we have to deal with our childhood stuff, actually, and heal and grow up. And then we have to learn to approach these situations with courage. And then we can be sensitive to the whole field and each other and enter into those troubled waters in an empathetic yet courageous way.
Okay. That sounds like a journey.
Yes.
And I know that you and we share one belief that this kind of journey is sort of lives from practices that are not. It's not like you go to a workshop and then you have it, but it's something you do daily. And you just wrote a book last year.
I did.
Pathways Home. Very nice book. Very recommendable. It's very poetic. It's very personal, and it's very practical. Got a lot of very concrete things one can do, a lot of practices. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you will, just let's take one thing that I think is quite important for this whole field that we're talking about, self-regulation. Mm-hmm. And it could be self-regulating yourself up because you want to, express it, or down to contain something a bit more, mm-hmm. or deal with it. Yeah. What would be do you have like favorite or like things that you say like this is something that somebody can do in their daily life if they want to start with a containment, like regulating yourself into down.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's quite a big, like you said, it's a journey, and it's quite a big project to get really good at something that we're not very good at. Right. So, if you know about yourself, dear listener, that you find conflict situations very difficult or challenging, and you want to get better at it, it's probably going to take some training. It's just like anything, it's a skill, and we don't It would be very nice if we functioned like websites where you can just go on a workshop as though you're clicking a button on a website and the whole page changes. But it's not really like that. We're much more of a organic growth process than that. And so I would say, yes, there are some simple things that you can do that in the moment will change the state of activation of your nervous system. Yes, there are, and I'll come to that in a moment. And if you really want to get skillful at that, you probably need to train your system on a regular basis. Take on and there's 10,000 practices out there. And of course, many of us are familiar with mindfulness practices, and those can be great, but often, especially if you're very highly activated, your nervous system is a bit jacked up all the time, which most of us are, because all of these devices with backlit screens and the constant flow of information coming through them jack up our nervous system. In fact, when we get a message, even if it's a friendly message, certainly if we watch the news, anything like that, any bit of new information comes into our nervous system has a slight jolt as though something scary had just happened. Like neurochemically, hormonally, it's exactly the same process of activation. And so most of us are really chronically overactivated and really need to learn how to settle our nervous system back down. So maybe I could suggest a couple of simple practices you can do to take you in that direction. Not that they're a magic pill, it really does take practice, but every little bit does help, and just turning in a different direction, even for a moment, can change things. So the first thing I would say is take a deep breath, and take a deep breath in, and then particularly take a long, slow breath out. Right. Like make the exhale longer than the inhale, and let there be a little bit of space at the end of the exhale before you take in another inhale. So why don't we just do that now? And if you're listening, follow along. And you can just go. Then you can breathe in again. And that moment of pause, the longer exhale calms down the nervous system, and the moment of pause calms down the nervous system too. So that's something you can do that's quite surreptitious. You can be in a difficult meeting and do that without anyone really noticing. I mean, I did it a bit quite audibly, but of course you don't have to. Yeah. Another little thing you can do is just put a hand on your belly, or you can hold one of your thumbs in the other hand. Now just wrap your fingers around one of your thumbs, either way, or just switch back and forth. And so those are also things that you can do when you're in a conversation and they're not totally weird, and so the people around you aren't going to think, what's he doing? So the simple little things you can do like that, and you'll notice they're all basically body-based. I'm not a huge fan of ways of talking yourself out of, or thinking yourself out of what you're feeling. There's an awful lot of that around, and kind of self-manipulation of, telling myself a positive sentence, and then I'm yeah, maybe. But the nervous system functions in the body, and I think the fastest, most efficient, and the way with the most integrity involves changing the body. It's just the easiest way to go about it, and it has less self-manipulation in it than things like positive affirmations. Okay. So physical things like that. If you have a bit of time on your hands, go for a walk. That's a really good one. We humans are built to walk. We're really good walkers. And the body is designed to walk way more than we usually do. And it's a very good way, especially walking outdoors, very good way to regulate the nervous system. And not just to walk looking at the ground, but to walk looking up and around you as well. And to feel the physical experience of walking and tune into that. So that's another.
What about more my case then? Regulating yourself up. I want to, I have it in me. I feel it. It's somewhere, and I want to let it out. I want to give it, to the world. I want to address my frustration, my anger, my, my tension. Let's say.
Okay, so then I would recommend a moment of vigorous physical movement.
Okay.
I would walk vigorously, or if you're somewhere a little bit private, and I'm a great advocate of going to the bathroom. You know, if you have a private moment, go to the bathroom, just jump up and down a little bit and take some deep breaths as you jump up and down and wave your arms around vigorously, give yourself a shake all over, things like that. You know, literally just get your blood moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Could this? I mean, I'd be curious about the dark sides, and I know these practices would be something on a daily basis. Now, when we're talking about going into a more profound, deeper space, and I think those are probably important too. That you have somebody with you who guides you, and I said, I was on the weekend. I could experience this in this great workshop, and my feeling was, does it ever get dangerous if people go into that space? If you are in connection with let's say, the dark side of that anger and that violent thing that is no doubt there in all of us somewhere, and to bring it out, do you have to be careful where you stop, and how do you navigate that?
I think these practices can be dangerous, yes, and of course, a long time ago, this kind of practice was relegated to closely guarded groups of initiates, where you would have very skilled tuition and a very well-held container. And Joe Public would not walk in and just take part in some high-voltage training exercise without any foundation. And of course, these days, you can buy a book like mine off the shelf and dip into some quite strong work. And now in my book, I've tried to address that and talked about the need for going slow and building from foundations up and not biting off more than you can chew. But, you know, people can open the book anywhere they like. And it's the same with workshops, you know, and there's all kinds of very, very strong training practices that are being just splattered out into the world now for anyone to walk into. And yeah, I think particularly if someone is mentally unstable or dealing with a lot of very intense trauma from their history, their childhood or adulthood, whatever, yes, these practices can be dangerous. But, you know, I don't think that's a reason for being too careful when we're in the situation that we're in these days, which is, we are, as far as I'm concerned, we are literally in an emergency. This is like all the sirens should be blaring, emergency, all hands on deck.
Yes.
We're in deep trouble. And I think part of the trouble is our internal world, our unhealed trauma. And when there's an emergency, you know, like if you're in a ship at sea and there's a massive storm coming, then the emergency procedures that you take to make everything kind of towards your survival are not necessarily going to be safe. You know, there's going to have to be people running around in the storm on the deck, quickly taking the sails down or whatever. You know, I think we're not in a safe position. So yes, I advocate going carefully and being intelligent about it. But again, it's like, let's be courageous and take ourselves on. And take risks, try things, because we are in trouble. And something needs to happen. It's not enough to just sit on the couch and hope that someone else will do it.
Well said. I agree. I agree. And I agree that the body is a super important part. And I'm super happy also that at the moment we seem to be in a time when people wake up to that a little bit. There is a renaissance of the body in a way, if one wants to call this. And yet I encounter a lot of settings where that is still very weird and awkward to go there, to go in your body, to feel, to move, you know, to get off from your chair, or to even not have tables in the room. Oh my God, how vulnerable am I when I go there? Would you have, like, I'm sure you also work with, I mean, you probably work with people who want to go there and with some people who are not used to this. What would be your suggestion to open people up to this, you know, great experience that is there to add?
Yeah, well, I notice your use of the word renaissance, and I agree with you in a way, but that's a long slumber that the body is coming out of, or our attention to the body. You know, the body got lost a long time ago, and you know, quite a lot of religious practices place great emphasis on the body somehow being bad or certainly inferior to spirit, if not downright evil and kind of a source of trouble in comparison with the divine. And that goes back a long way. And I think that our divorce from the body began at least that far back, if not further. So we're in attempting to reconnect with the power of the body and the beauty and like fabulousness of working with the body as a transformational tool. We're tracing our steps back a really, really long way. So I think the people's awkwardness with that is understandable. And of course, that split from body and spirit, or mind and body, or soul and body, or goodness and body, that split has some very tangible ways that it is baked into our experience as humans if we grew up in this kind of culture, like shame and guilt and fear of what might be lurking in the basement of myself. And that's what comes up for a lot of people. If they've never done anything like that before, or have spent their life just as talking heads, basically, then trying to come back down out of the head and into the body and to experience myself as a physical creature necessitates actually coming to in touch with those very difficult feelings of awkwardness and shame. And so it's not nothing that we're asking people to do, and especially if they have any wounding around their sexuality, and if they've been hurt physically as children, which a lot of people have. And then as soon as you start working with the body, there is those kind of experiences are buried in the body. And so it's not nothing to ask people to get it back in touch. But like I said earlier, we need stuff that's not nothing. We need radical change and radical awakening and empowering. And you can't empower humans very far if you stay in the head. It just doesn't go very far. You have to address the body. And so I would say, like the way I work with people, if I'm in a room with people who have never done anything like that before, is have them do something very simple that they do a lot, which is walk. And you walk around the space, but you walk around the space actually noticing what the experience is on a physical level. So you pay attention to the sensations of your feet touching the floor, et cetera, and you notice the interplay of people coming close, getting further away. And even that's really big. Like that's a great 1 hour workshop for a working team, for example, to just pay attention to the physical in the room.
Right. Oh. Thank you. Now, sort of coming to the final draws of this talk here. I just wanted to ask you, because you've been around for a long time. I think you've been doing this work for 30 years or something. Very ancient. Yeah, you sort of look it too. No, but it's you've been doing this stuff for a long time. I know first in the 5 Rhythms world, and then with 01, which your work, your platform from which you work now. And apart from the fact that maybe the body has gained more light and attention, do you see other things changing in the way people go about this business of entering a room like that, of opening themselves up for this kind of development? Do you see other people doing it? Do you see things changing in the way what topics come up when people open themselves?
Yes, I mean, when I started working with this kind of field for my own exploration and interest in the mid-80s, so a long time ago, and during that time and right through the 90s and into the early 2000s, I would say that the primary need that I noticed in the rooms I was working was to kind of take the lid off. People needed to just let off steam and open up and kind of increase their energy levels and get interactive and break through barriers. And it was very dynamic and exciting. It was an exciting time to be in the field. Now, I would say there is such a deep level of vulnerability and trauma and grief in most rooms that you walk into if you scratch the surface. Right. People are really maxed out, as I was saying earlier, from the amount of stimulation that we're in, and the general collective realization of what we're up against. And I think also our collective understanding of the way that trauma functions. Those things put together have served to create a kind of collective atmosphere that is far more vulnerable now. And that I would say the primary need is actually to slow down, to slow down and get more grounded and in a way more sort of quietly intimate with what is. Just can we possibly slow down enough to actually feel and be with what is, rather than trying to get anywhere, really. I would say that's the step that's in front of us collectively at the moment.
Okay, that's so interesting. I feel the same about organization development, that while we used to be all about trying to induce change and, adaptation and all that, right now, so often it's just about enabling stability and enabling calmness and not getting freaked out by everything and just having stable platforms from which to operate and look at things and do the next move. So that's, that resonates.
Interesting.
Thank you. Well, is there anything that would be said that I didn't ask you?
There's one more thing I would like to say, which I thought might come up near the beginning of the conversation,
right.
but it didn't. We raced on to other interesting things, which is your description of this muscle as moving, I think you used the word gracefully, through rough waters.
Yes.
Have I got that right?
Yes. Yeah.
I would say it's not always graceful, and it can't be, and it not even should be necessarily. Yes. And that there's a place for getting rough along with the rough waters. And moments of grace in situations like that are wonderful, but not necessarily something to have as a benchmark for now this is going well. And I think there's really a place for being willing to be troubled along with the rough waters.
Maybe we should call it courageous.
Moving
courageously.
Yeah, you could do.
Yeah, no, good point. Yeah, I take that.
Okay.
Thank you. Final question: where can people find more about your thoughts? What can they do if they like what they hear?
Okay, I'm on the usual channels. I've got my website, which is called adambarley.com, and you can find me on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook. But really, I would go to my website first, and everything's there, and you'll find links to other things there. So adambarley.com.
And there's also probably a calendar of workshops if you want to dive into that. Yes. Okay. We have that probably also on the site, so you can, if you don't like the acoustic version, you can look at it in the text version. Right. Great. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Andy.
So, if you like this conversation and this topic, tune in again and visit our website, socius.de, is SOCIUS.de, and write us a note or get in contact about what it is that you think we need to do and develop in order for our organizations and our teams to become more self-organized and more in tune with our human nature.